Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut, to getting well-informed fast. And today, we're tackling maybe the biggest conceptual hurdle in science.
No, definitely. The shift from classical to quantum reality, it's huge.
Exactly. Straight from Feynman's lectures, actually.
Yeah.
Chapter 38.
Right, a really pivotal chapter. Feynman's brilliant here because he doesn't just, hand you the rules.
No, he builds the case first.
Yeah.
He shows why the old physics, the classical stuff, just had to fail.
Exactly. Why deterministic particles and predictable waves? Well, they just don't cut it at the smallest scales.
So our mission today is to really unpack that argument. Get why particles and waves are, well, approximations.
Rough ones, yeah. Very rough.
And that the fundamental reality underneath operates differently. It's statistical.
Completely. And we want to get that insight into why. Why does it all become probabilities and uncertainty?
What are the actual constraints nature puts on things?
That's it. We have to learn this new language, where knowing the exact position and the exact momentum at the same time is just off the table.
Okay. And to start learning that language, the absolute core concept is the probability amplitude.
Right. So classical physics, you know the start, you predict the end.
Exactly.
Quantum. It's all probabilities. What is this amplitude thing doing?
Okay, so think of any event, like finding a particle somewhere. Its behavior is described by this mathematical thing, the probability amplitude. It's a complex number.
Complex number, like with imaginary parts.
Yep. And you can't directly measure the amplitude itself. The crucial thing is the probability of actually finding the particle that's proportional to the absolute square of this amplitude.
John, why complex? If we just want probability, why not use a simple positive number?
Yeah.
Why the wave-like stuff, the sine waves in space and time?
Because of interference. That's the key. Only complex numbers with magnitude and phase can add up in ways that sometimes cancel out destructive interference or build up constructive interference.
I see. So if a particle could take two different paths, you add the amplitudes for each path first. Then you square the result to get the final probability. That addition step, that's where all the quantum weirdness, like interference patterns, even for single particles, comes from.
Got it. So the wave nature is still essential, even if we're talking about particles. And this leads to Feynman's big connection, right? Linking wave properties to particle properties.
Exactly. Frequency and wave number, those are wave things. Energy and momentum, those are particle things.
And they're linked how?
Through Planck's constant facts. It's like the fundamental conversion factor. Energy is phi is phi omega. Momentum is EP, P is high bar F.
So these equations, they're basically defining what a particle even means in quantum mechanics. Its energy is related to its amplitude's frequency.
Precisely. And its momentum is related to the spatial wave number of its amplitude. It redefines the concepts.
Okay, but as soon as you make that link, the idea of a nice, simple point particle seems to get fuzzy, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Because think about it. To define a particle's position precisely, say within a small region delta x at, its probability amplitude has to be 0 everywhere else.
Right. You have to squeeze the wave into that box.
And what happens when you squeeze a wave? You lose information about its wavelength. A short wave packet is made of many different wavelengths superimposed.
And since wavelength is tied to momentum, POG, chi step bar, TAOB, and K time day, if you don't have a precise wavelength, you can't have a precise momentum.
Exactly. The act of localizing the particle in space forces an inherent uncertainty, a spread in its momentum. That's the uncertainty principle emerging right there.
Which brings us nicely to the single-slit experiment. Feynman uses this beautifully. Imagine shooting particles, say electrons, at a screen with one narrow vertical slit with dollars.
Okay, so as a particle goes through that slit, we know its vertical position pretty well, right? It has to be somewhere within that width. So delta is about bow dollar.
Classically, you'd expect just the shadow of the slit on the detector behind it. A sharp line.
But that's not what happens. You get a diffraction pattern. The beam spreads out vertically.
It behaves like a wave passing through the slit, and that spreading means the vertical momentum isn't 0 anymore. It now has a range, a spread, delta pi.
We gained information about position, delta x prox b, but we lost information about momentum. The measurement itself introduced momentum uncertainty.
And basic wave physics tells us how much spread. The angle of the spread, theta, depends on the wavelength lambda and the slit width dollar. Roughly, theta approx lambda to be.
Right. And the spread in the vertical momentum, delta pi, is roughly the total momentum times that angle, theta.
So if you put those together, delta x approx b and delta pi theta approx p, then use the quantum link pp, the L approx p.
Do the substitution.
Yeah.
Lambda cancels out, b cancels out, and you're left with delta x. Delta pi is approximately dollars or more, precisely the bar of it. the uncertainty principle.
Wow. So it falls right out of combining basic wave diffraction with the quantum momentum wavelength relation.
It's not just a rule someone made up. It's a direct consequence. And it's fundamental. It's not about bad measuring tools. Nature itself has this limit.
You can't know both perfectly. Try to measure position better, smaller delta, and your momentum measurement gets fuzzier.
Larger delta, or vice versa. It's like, imagine trying to measure the exact pitch of a musical note. For a really pure single frequency, like momentum, the sound wave has to go on for a long time.
Meaning the location of the start or end of the note is very uncertain.
Exactly. Long wave train, precise frequency momentum, but uncertain position. Short pulse, well-defined position, but it's made of many frequencies, so uncertain momentum.
We can see that trade-off if we try to measure momentum really accurately, right?
Yeah.
Using something like a diffraction grating instead of a single slit.
Yeah, a grating with many lines gives you a much sharper interference pattern. Those sharp peaks let you determine the angle, and therefore the momentum, very precisely.
Okay, so small delta pi.
But to get that super sharp pattern, the wave train hitting the grating needs to be very long. It has to cover many lines on the grating simultaneously to interfere properly.
Ah, so if the wave train has a length $, the particle could be anywhere along that length.
Meaning delta exact is at least $. So precise momentum means uncertain position. You can't beat the trade-off.
Okay, this wave-particle duality and the uncertainty principle seem fundamental for, like, free electrons or photons. But where does this show up in the solid stuff we see around us, in matter?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. Think about crystal diffraction. A crystal, like salt or a metal, is essentially a natural three-dimensional diffraction grating.
Made of atoms arranged in a regular lattice.
Exactly, with atoms sitting in parallel planes separated by some distance $. If you shoot X-rays at a crystal, they reflect off these planes. You get constructive interference, strong reflections, only at specific angles given by Bragg's law.
Right, $2 in theta and lambda. That tells you about the crystal structure based on the X-ray wavelength.
Yes, but here's the amazing part. If you shoot electrons or neutrons, things we normally think of as particles at the same crystal.
They do the same thing?
Exactly the same thing. They diffract. They only scatter strongly at angles predicted by Bragg's law using the wavelength lambda calculated from their momentum, p pseudo lambda.
Wow. So electrons are waves when interacting with the crystal lattice.
Undeniably. It confirms the wave nature of matter in a very concrete way. The structure of the crystal dictates how these matter waves scatter.
But maybe the most profound consequence you mentioned earlier is how this whole framework, especially uncertainty, explains why atoms don't just collapse.
Right. This was a total disaster for classical physics. An electron orbiting a nucleus is accelerating, so it should radiate energy, lose speed, and spiral into the nucleus in a fraction of a second. But atoms are stable.
So why don't they collapse, according to quantum mechanics?
It comes down to energy minimization and the uncertainty principle. The total energy, A lole, of the electron in an atom, say hydrogen, has two parts. There's the potential energy.
Which is negative, because the electron is attracted to the positive nucleus.
Yeah.
It gets more negative the closer it gets.
Right. And then there's the kinetic energy, which is positive and depends on momentum squared.
Okay, where does uncertainty in that?
Well, the electron is confined within the atom, or roughly within a radius set. So its position uncertainty, delta, is about a ball.
Which means its momentum tellum must have an uncertainty, a minimum spread of about balla.
Exactly. So the momentum itself must be at least roughly a baller. That means the kinetic energy is roughly 2 milli. It goes up as 1 to 2 millars.
Ah, so if the electron tries to get really close to the nucleus, small baller, the potential energy goes way down, more negative. But the kinetic energy, forced by the uncertainty principle, goes way up.
That's the key. This quantum pressure from the kinetic energy term fights against the electrical attraction. The atom settles at a size $1, where the total energy potential plus kinetic is at its minimum value.
It finds a balance point.
It finds the lowest possible energy state. And if you actually do the math, minimize that energy expression with respect to $1.
You get the right answer.
You get the Bohr radius, $10, about half an angstrom, 0.528 times 10 meters, and the ground state energy, E dollars, equals $13 to 6 eV, the experimentally measured size and binding energy of hydrogen.
That's incredible. The stability and size of atoms, and therefore all matter, comes directly from the uncertainty principle.
It's a fundamental quantum effect underpinning everything.
And this idea of stable energy states, that leads straight to discrete energy levels, right? No more continuous spirals.
Absolutely. The atom can only exist stably in specific states, each with a precise energy. E dollars, E2, E33, and so on. These are the stationary states. Electrons don't radiate when they're in one of these allowed states.
But they can jump between them.
Yes, if an electron is in a higher energy state, say N dollars, it can drop to a lower one, N dollars. When it does that, it has to get rid of the extra energy.
By emitting a photon, a particle of light.
Correct. And the energy of that photon is exactly the difference between the two atomic states, MMS.
And since the photon's energy is related to its frequency by mmMAK, the frequency of the emitted light is precisely amplitude. This explains why atoms emit and absorb light only at very specific, sharp frequencies, their spectral lines. It's a direct window into their allowed energy levels.
Which classical physics just couldn't explain at all.
Not even close. It's purely a quantum phenomenon.
Okay, so the physics is profoundly different. Let's talk about the philosophical side. Feynman really stresses this is a huge shift in how we view the world. No more determinism.
That's a major takeaway. The classical ideal was know the initial state perfectly, predict the future perfectly. Quantum mechanics says no.
Why not? Is it just that amplitudes are weird?
It's deeper. First, the role of observation changes. You can't just passively observe something at the quantum level. The act of measuring, say, position, inevitably disturbs its momentum because of the uncertainty principle.
The observer affects the system. Fundamentally. You can't know everything simultaneously because trying to know one thing precisely forces the other into a state of uncertainty.
And the second big shift, prediction.
Quantum mechanics is incredibly powerful for prediction, but only predicts probabilities. We can calculate the probability distribution for where an electron might land after passing through slits, but we can never predict with certainty where any single electron will hit.
Only the statistical pattern emerges after many events.
Right. It gives us the rules for calculating the odds, but not the outcome of a single roll of the dice, so to speak.
Now, Feynman draws a contrast with classical indeterminacy, right? Like trying to predict exactly where a falling water drop will land after bouncing off many things.
Yes, that's a really important distinction. Classically, we might fail to predict the water drop's exact path because we can't know the initial conditions perfectly, and tiny errors get magnified like crazy. It's chaos theory, sensitivity to initial conditions.
We call that practical indeterminacy. It's about lack of information or computational power.
Exactly. But in quantum mechanics, the indeterminacy of position and momentum isn't practical, it's fundamental. Even with perfect measuring devices and infinite computers, nature itself imposes a limit. Delta X, delta PS bar 2, is a law of physics.
It's inherent uncertainty, not just ignorance.
Precisely. Reality itself is fuzzy at that level.
So wrapping this up, the journey through Chapter 38 really forces us to abandon the old deterministic particle picture.
Completely. We have to embrace a world governed by probability amplitudes, where wave properties like frequency define particle properties like energy, and vice versa.
And the uncertainty that arises from this wave-particle connection isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's the foundation for atomic stability and the structure of matter.
It's the core rule of the quantum game. Feynman does a masterful job of showing us why we have to play by these new, strange, but ultimately correct rules.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Feynman's introduction to the quantum world. It really reshapes your thinking.
It certainly does.
So here's a final thought for you. We talked about practical indeterminacy, like the water drop arising from complexity, and fundamental quantum indeterminacy arising from physical law. Which of these feels more like a limit on what we can know versus a limit on what is knowable in principle? Does that distinction even matter?
Something to ponder. We hope this look at Chapter 38 was a useful shortcut to getting informed.
Until next time, keep digging.